So here is the long title of my thesis. I'm going to break it down in 3 parts for you. It's the influence of the Oratory of Filippo Neri in Rome on the theological perspective of Caravaggio and selected religious paintings. And really the question I was trying to ask, or try to answer I should say, is that how is Caravaggio, who's a famous Baroque painter, and he produces some incredible religious art, but he himself personally was not known to be a very religious person. He was one converter, he had multiple mistresses. How is it possible that he's able to contribute in the realm of religious art some very profound and very deeply theological themes? So I'm making the argument that a lot of that came from an organization known as the Oratory that was founded by Filippo Neri. And so that's what I'm attempting to do here, and I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. First off, who is Filippo Neri? How was Caravaggio connected to the Oratory, which he founded? And lastly, how is it evident in his religious paintings that he was inspired by the Oratory? So that's where we're going. So like I said, Caravaggio, there are his dates there. Not known as a very religious man, but this is the guy here who I think gave him a particular religious perspective, although they probably never met. Neri began, he lived in Rome his entire life. He began by working with the poor in Rome, and especially with orphans. He was not a religious priest until much later in his life. He wasn't ordained until his late 30s. But he begins an organization called the Brotherhood of the Little Oratory. And this was a place for a lot of these poor people that he was working with to kind of congregate, where he would feed them, and he would also just play games with the kids and just try to make it a very comfortable setting for them. He was quite a character in Rome. He was known as the Socrates of Rome, and one of his biographers says he would be seen going through the streets with a bunch of broom flowers in his hand, stopping every few steps to sniff it with an expression of ecstasy, as if he were smelling the most aromatic flowers. Or he would go about solemnly, wearing a cushion on his head like a turban, or wearing a coat made of foxtails, which he would then give to one of his companions to keep him warm. This in the middle of summer. So he had quite a very interesting personality. And he did that purposely as a way to try to draw people to him, but not for the sense of a selfish reason, but so that he could get to know people. It was a way to try to introduce himself to people by people coming to him and wondering why he was doing the crazy things he was doing. And of course, he in turn would ask people why they were doing the crazy things that they were doing. So the Oratory, which he founds, starts in 1558 to have these non-liturgical services, which attracted many artists and musicians in the center of Rome. These were mostly talks that were given on different themes from church history, lives of saints, or things to do with culture. In fact, the same biographer would say that the Oratory brought religion, culture, and nature into a happy harmony. The main thing that Neri was trying to emphasize is that an experience of God comes through the human experience. That it's not so much about praying in a very abstract way, it's about encountering God in the here and the now. And that's why music and art were very fundamental to this, because they were transcendent things which were very much a part of this world, but would lead people beyond this world. So it was very much caught in the human dimension. That was Neri's big emphasis. Now, how does this get connected with Caravaggio? Well, you don't need to worry about this chart too much, other than the fact to know that there are 3 families that I kind of connect Caravaggio with the Oratory. And unfortunately, I don't have the nifty red highlight thing that Diana did, so I'm going to do the old-fashioned laser pointer here. So, we have here the Merisi family, which is Caravaggio's family. His mother was very friendly with a family known as the Colonna family. In fact, it is Caravaggio's maternal grandfather who assisted in the financial affairs of Costanza Colonna. Costanza Colonna is going to be an important name here. Now, Caravaggio's sister was a wet nurse to Costanza's grandchildren, and also Costanza's son Fabrizio married Anna Borromeo. and she was the sister of Carlo Borromeo. Now, the Borromeo family is the second, or really the third important family here. So you have Caravaggio's family, you have the Colonna family, and the Borromeo family. Carlo Borromeo, this Anna's sister, was the bishop of Milan. And Milan is the area from where Caravaggio is from. Now, Anna, being the sister of the bishop, was kind of significant because the Colonna family was then friends and was married into the Borromeo family. Carlo Borromeo was very good friends with Filippo Neri. So the Borromeo and Neri connection is where I'm arguing that Caravaggio gets introduced into the oratory. In fact, when Caravaggio moves to Rome to pursue his art career, he ends up staying in a family home that was owned by the Colonna family. So clearly, the Colonna family, which was also physically close to where the oratory was located in Rome, paved an opening. And especially since the Borromeo connection was there too, Caravaggio became friends with Carlo's cousin, Federico. And Federico Borromeo was also a cardinal in the church, he was a bishop in the church. He clearly knew Neri very well and hung out at the oratory all the time. So that is kind of the way the physical connection here works. So that was the main thing that I'm arguing here. And Federico Borromeo, the cousin of Carlo Borromeo from Milan, he eventually became the bishop of Milan too. So there was that relationship between the Milan and Roman connection. Federico was known to own different paintings of Caravaggio, and he also protected Caravaggio from 1597 to 1601. And the guy needed a lot of protection because he was kind of a pain in the neck to everyone. And so when he won the favor of a cleric, that was a good thing for him. So he wanted to find the favor of some cleric, and Federico was one of them. So that is kind of the connection there. And also, the last thing to look at here is in the Oratorio's church, the Chiesa Nuova in Rome, is one of Caravaggio's paintings. Before we get to that, here's an image of Carlo Borromeo and Filippo Neri together. So this proves they knew each other, right? So now we're saying the type of connection there. But this particular image, which is one of Caravaggio's more popular, famous paintings, is in the church where the oratory met. So it's a direct physical connection with the oratory. It doesn't actually hang there now. There's a reproduction there. It hangs in the Vatican Museum. But this was commissioned by someone who was very close to the oratory to Caravaggio to paint. So lastly, how is this reflected? Here's the installation of the entombment right here. So that's on one of the side altars in the Chiesa Nuova in Rome, the new church, which replaced an old church, as you can imagine, which is where the oratory first started. Now, the last part here is how is it shown in his paintings that he's getting a theological inspiration from this oratory? Well, the big thing, like I said, is it's the human experience. Now, religious art, Christian art, always has to deal with trying to depict Christ and showing the relationship between his divinity and his humanity. And of course, there are lots of techniques that have been traditionally used to emphasize the divinity of Christ, namely putting a halo on his head, right? But the interesting thing that Caravaggio does is that he doesn't seem to always right away jump on showing the divinity of Christ. He emphasizes more of the humanity of Christ, going along with that whole theme that it's through the human encounter that one comes to know the divine. So while you see here kind of vaguely a halo over Christ, notice the hand, which anyone who knows art might be able to pick it up from here. Right? This is on the Sistine ceiling. Michelangelo, which is, of course, the first name of Caravaggio, too, so he kind of had a certain type of affinity for Michelangelo. But notice, it's not the hand of God, it's the hand of Adam. So what Caravaggio does here is he places the hand of Adam on Christ. Of course, there's a theology beginning with St. Paul that shows that Christ is the new Adam. But yet, we know Adam was human. So this is one of these ways of trying to show that Christ embodies the humanity of the world. Also, the figure here is known to be St. Peter, who is considered to be the foundation of the Catholic Church, the first pope. He stands here in between Christ and Matthew. Some think, or most people think, that this would be Matthew pointing to himself like, who me? Some say it's this guy down here. But the key thing to know about the placement of Peter is that it's through the church that one would come to know the divine. And of course, we know the church is human, in some ways all too human, right? And you see here the hand of Peter mirroring the hand of Jesus, to try to show that interplay between the relationship of the church and Christ. And lastly, it's the calling of St. Matthew. So it's Christ who calls Matthew to follow him. And the importance of the word was fundamental in the oratory. That's why people came there. There was good preaching. All right, so this wasn't like, typical Catholic preaching today. This was very good preaching. And so people were very much attracted to coming there because they were getting something different. And so the importance of the word really speaks volumes in here, because it's really just the word. It's really Jesus saying, come follow me. And Matthew leaves everything he was doing and follows him. There was nothing else that was done. So it comes to that human encounter once again of the word. And lastly, look at this last image here. This is from the same triptych in Rome of the series on Matthew. This is the martyrdom of St. Matthew. And this is important because Caravaggio places himself in the painting himself. He does this on a few of his paintings. But the key thing here is that, self-portraits of artists throughout the history of art, that I would take this to be something a little bit different, because the key thing that the oratory was teaching is that when they were giving these talks and giving these meditations, it was really placing yourself within the context of the lives of the saints, something from church history or something from Scripture, to really place yourself within it, to really make the past present. I mean, even in this other book, even here, the one thing that Caravaggio is known for doing is that he has Christ and Peter in a type of attire that would be from the time period of Christ, right? I mean, this is really what Christ wears, these types of robes. But these guys here are all in the clothing of the present period of Caravaggio, the contemporary period of Caravaggio, trying to show that transposition of time and space, that there's a universal calling that's given by Christ in every moment. And that's kind of what's happening here too. I mean, here's Caravaggio in the present, placing himself within the martyrdom. And so I would argue that this transposition of time and space was also another fundamental aspect of the oratory. And so while Caravaggio himself personally may not have been religious, and we know him not to really even ever become terribly religious throughout his life, even though he had association with lots of religious people, it really shows the fact that while one can reject the Christian claim, it's practically impossible to ignore. And I think that Caravaggio was caught up in the great mystery of the Christian claim because of his own, perhaps, sinful disposition himself. And so that is basically it. So, thank you very much.